now, and I'm going to introduce Ashley. I just want to highlight the fact of how popular Ashley is as one of our business advisors. Ashley gets booked up very quickly. We don't know what the magic ingredient is, but the feedback's always excellent. So
neither do I.
So it's great that we're able to get this sort of one-to-many content from Ashley as well. So yeah, she knows her stuff. Ashley, over to you.
All right, thank you, Ant, and you flatterer. Yeah, welcome everybody to today's Startup Club session. And I will introduce myself for those I've not met before. I'll do that properly in a moment. But I just wanted to begin with a brief overview of what we're hoping to cover in the next hour or so, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how much time we leave for questions at the end. So today we're going to be looking at that exciting journey of taking an idea, taking it from that light bulb moment, an idea for a new product or a new service maybe, and taking it all the way to from that concept stage all the way to actual launch. And that can seem like quite an overwhelming journey, which is why for many people, their idea remains just that, a fleeting light bulb moment, an idea, a what if. But it is possible to break that journey down into key stages or steps, which makes it a little bit easier and less overwhelming. And that's what we're going to try and do today to help you design your own roadmap from taking your concept right through to market. So each of those steps, as you'll see up there on the screen, are a meaty workshop topic in themselves. So today is going to be more of an introduction to those stages and some of the key actions that you need to take. You can then take these away and follow up in greater detail at your leisure. And I think some of the topics we are going to be expanding on in some of the other Startup Club sessions as well. For example, in a few weeks' time, I'll be running more of a deep dive into marketing for your business. Okay, so those are the 10 steps. So who is this webinar for? Well, I'm going to be working on the assumption today that as this is a startup club, most people in the room are startups. So some of you may have actually started your business already, and so you've probably begun to explore some of these steps, or you may be very early on in your journey and just have an idea but not sure what to do next with that idea. So in which case for you, all of this will hopefully be very relevant. But equally, a lot of the content today will also be relevant if you are an existing and established business. We all know what challenging times we're going through at the moment, and there are going to be a number of businesses who are looking for new revenue streams at the moment. So it might be that you're a service business looking to introduce a product for the first time, for example, or the other way around, you might be a product-based business looking at how to diversify and launch a new service as part of your offer. So there will hopefully still be material here today if that's the case for you. So as Ant said, the slides I think will be shared in the next couple of days. Feel free to take notes, and a recording will be made available as well. And at the end, we'll hopefully have enough time to have a few questions, so do pop those in the chat as we go along. Okay, just very briefly, an introduction to me. My background, as Ant says, I'm a business advisor with OxLEP, and I've worked on a number of their startup and growth programs over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm currently managing one of their programs supporting social enterprises, charities, and purposeful businesses in Oxfordshire. And I think there's a few people in the room today who I will have met with that hat on. But I've also spent the last 10 years interviewing some of the founders and entrepreneurs behind the UK's fastest growing, most successful businesses with the Sunday Times Fast Track. So I've seen and heard firsthand some incredible journeys of people and organisations who have done just that, take an idea from that initial inkling, that initial light bulb moment, right through to launch and then growth. But probably most relevant to today's topic, and why I'm really happy to be part of this Startup Support Club, is because I'm actually a business owner and startup myself. And alongside my co-founders, I've gone through and applied many of those steps to launch my own range of products as part of the Wonky Food Company. We're just over 2 years old, so I'm not sure now whether whether I could still call myself a startup, but I'm not quite ready to call myself a grown-up business yet. So I'll stick with startup for now. But very briefly, the concept of our business is that we take unwanted and surplus, imperfect fruit and veg that's rejected by the supermarkets, and we turn those into relishes. We launched in 2018, I think it was now, yes, almost 3 years ago, and are now stocked in the Co-op, Ocado, and a range of other independents. And we also have our own online shop as well. So hopefully, the reason I'm mentioning that is because as we go through these steps today, I'm hopefully going to demonstrate not only talking about the theory, but give some real life examples of how to put these various steps into practice by giving you some examples of how I did that with my business. Okay, so let's get stuck in. I am going to take it that everyone here today has an idea, although I appreciate everybody is probably at different stages with that idea. But of course, it's one thing having a great idea, but it's quite another having a viable idea that can be turned into a product or a service that a customer or client is willing to spend money to buy. So the very first step on the journey is to be able to articulate exactly what that idea or that offer is, and to explain what value it brings to the customer. So this is known as your value proposition. So this is probably a term that you might have heard of. It's probably been touched upon in some of the other Startup Club webinars, but it is worth repeating, because having a strong value proposition from the very beginning is fundamental. It's a fundamental starting point from which to be able to start your business. Okay, so another way of looking at a value proposition is, what is the problem that you're aiming to solve? So in its simplest form, you can turn it into a formula. So we help X do Y by doing Z. So at Wonky, for example, what we do is to help socially conscious consumers reduce food waste by making tasty food service relishes. Doesn't have to be catchy at this stage. It's not necessarily your marketing tagline, but it's a more of a mission statement, which can then help inform your snappier branding messages a little bit later on. So much better known than Wonky, Airbnb is another example. So Airbnb exists to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, providing healthy travel that is local, authentic, diverse, inclusive, and sustainable. So there's a long list there of value statements, but over time, this has become distilled to a very simple but effective marketing tagline for Airbnb, which is simply belong anywhere. Now, Facebook's all about helping users to connect and to share through technology. And companies like Facebook, of course, can have more than one value proposition. So it might offer a different value proposition to its advertisers, who are one customer group, to a value proposition for you and I, its end users. So doing this exercise is really useful to do early on with your own idea. And it especially comes into its own later on in our steps, when you need to think about areas such as your brand image, your marketing message, and also the tone of voice that you use to talk to your customers. Okay. So once you've articulated your idea into a clear value proposition, the next stage is to find out if it actually has any legs. Some of the best ideas in the world, they just start as a hunch or an assumption, but at some point you do have to validate and test that hunch. Because just because you think it's a great idea, because you think that there's a problem out there that needs solving, doesn't mean that everybody else does. You don't need, obviously, everybody to need your product or service, but you do need enough people. So doing a thorough initial market research stage is really important with any new idea. This is going to be the first stage of market research, and a little bit later on, we're also going to be looking at how you need to do a crucial second stage of market testing with an actual prototype of your product or service. But at this stage, all you're really trying to identify is that there is a potential market to warrant taking your idea to the next step. So to start your research, you need to identify your target customer or customers, as you may have multiple customer segments. So these are the customers who are ultimately going to buy your product or service, and you really need to get them get to know them inside out. Are they men? Are they women? How old are they? Whereabouts do they live? Do you have more than one target market? Those all important multiple segments. We're going to be going into customer profiling in a lot more detail in the Marketing for Beginners workshop in, I think it's 3 weeks' time. So we'll just treat this on a sort of top level at the moment. So it's one thing establishing that there is a market, that there are customers for your product or service, but what if somebody has beaten you to it and got there first? So before you get too carried away with your product idea, it's important that you're really clear about who your competitors are and how you fit into the existing marketplace. So you may have identified a gap in the market, in which case, fantastic, great news, and you have an immediate competitive advantage by being the first to go to market. But that in itself can bring its challenges, as the market has yet to be proven. It sometimes can actually be better not being the first to market, but to be the second or the third, because that way you've let the pioneer brand, that first brand, go out there and test the market, make the mistakes and learn those lessons, which you can then benefit from by following close behind them. So I guess what I'm saying is don't ever be put off just because someone else is already doing your idea or something similar. The key thing is to identify where you can do things either better or do things differently. So that brings us to your USP, your unique selling point. Now, this may sometimes be very similar to your value proposition, but essentially it identifies your point of difference. So what sets you apart from your competitors? So it might be around price. Maybe you are cheaper than your competitor, or you may decide to go the other way and you could be a more luxury version of a product already on the market. Or you may decide that you want to compete on customer service, or perhaps your point of difference is around your delivery model. So you might be the first company to deliver a service online, or perhaps as a subscription service. So how do you go about finding this information for your market research stage? Well, there are a lot of very accessible ways of doing your research. Some well-crafted internet searches can actually take you a very long way. But it might help if I talk through the process we went through with Wonky to do our initial research. So this is actually a slide from one of our original pitch decks, a bit rudimentary. This was actually before food waste was high up on the agenda, as high as it is now. And it was even before the word wonky was being used as a term for imperfect fruit and veg. But we had started to read about the problems of food waste and what a serious problem it is, with basically a third of all food produced on the planet goes to waste, just falls out of the human food chain. And the truth about the level of supermarket waste as well was also just starting to come out in news reports. So we were pretty confident from day one that there was a problem there that needed fixing. But what we couldn't say for sure was how ready the consumer was to play a role in fixing that problem. We had that hunch, but we needed some evidence to be able to back that up. So in an area like food and drink, along with many other retail and consumer goods sectors, there is a lot of market research already available out there. You've probably heard of big organisations such as Mintel or Nielsen. Nielsen is here on our doorstep in Oxford. Now, these companies conduct really extensive research into consumer trends and patterns of behaviour. But the catch is you usually have to part with a few £1,000s of your cash if you want to access it. So a quick top tip for when the libraries open again is to get yourself a free membership to the British Library in London, because apart from being an amazing place to visit, beautiful building, they also have a really great business centre there where you can access for free pretty much every single piece of market research ever done globally. So at Wonky, we made use of that. We had that hunch that people wanted to buy more sustainably, but by doing that next level of research, we were able to find some useful stats and facts. So, for example, a 2018 Mintel report, which found that 83% of grocery shoppers believe that it's important that we cut back on food waste, and another report finding that almost half of UK customers found that or believed that buying ethical food and drink made them feel better. So we were also able to access data around the size of the relish and the condiment market, and also the fact that it was growing. So this more formal data backed up our assumptions and then increased our confidence to be able to take our idea to the next step. So when it came to looking at our competitors, that second stage of your market research, we drew up a market map. So on our market map, which you can see there, we looked at budget products versus premium, and then mainstream products versus specialists. So in our case, other environmental or sustainable brands. So you should have a go, see if you can actually draw up a market map like this for your particular sector or area that you want to break into. So we quickly discovered a direct competitor. So there was somebody else making relishes already out of surplus fruit and veg. So we could have said at that point, okay, game over, someone's beaten us to it. But actually the effect was the opposite, because what we discovered was that business was doing really well and they were growing fast, which was an indicator that there was market demand. They'd already proven the market by going first. And we'd also done our research at the British Library into the size of the relish market. So we could also make that quick calculation that there was room enough for both of us to be out there in the market. But having a direct competitor also helped us to identify our point of difference. And that was very much around our branding. So we decided to be more colourful. We decided to be more obviously wonky in our messaging, and we also emphasised our relationships with our farming partners, which was less obvious with our existing competitor. So after you have completed this initial desktop research phase, this might be the first point where you need to take a step back and ask yourself some questions. So what does the research tell you? Is the market big enough? Is there enough demand out there? Is your idea different enough to what's out there already? And of course, I mean, all these questions are relative. If you're wanting to create a lifestyle business, a second income, then you might not be put off by the fact that your target market is quite small. Big is not always best. And if you've identified the return that you need, you can still build a really rewarding venture on a small scale. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But this might also be reality check time. So if you have not been able to find evidence that there is an obvious problem out there that needs solving, if you're struggling to see how you can improve on an existing product or service, then this is where it might be wise just to press pause. And let's be clear about that as well. Being able to know when to stop is the sign of a really good entrepreneur, someone who doesn't let their heart rule their head. And it also means that if you've come up with one idea, it's highly likely that you'll have another. And one of those ideas will make it past this initial research and test phase. So don't be disheartened if you do have to take a step back at this point. However, that being said, I am going to make the assumption that everybody in the room today has a fantastic, viable idea that absolutely warrants being taken to the next stage. So that next stage is prototyping. Just going to have a quick sip of water. So a prototype, to use the dictionary definition, or I think in this case, the Wikipedia definition, a prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept or a process. So many of you might associate prototypes with manufacturing, but every product or service should have a prototyping phase. And this is where you create that first version, or otherwise known as a minimum viable product. And what are the benefits of creating a prototype? Just running through the ones that we have on the slide there. So one of the benefits is being able to demonstrate to customers, be able to get that all-important initial feedback, and then make those improvements and iterations as you go along. It's also an opportunity to identify some early design issues. You want to be able to discover those early on, not after you've spent hundreds or thousands of pounds later and having to correct those. It also can be a really practical way of clarifying the production costs and processes that are going to be involved in producing that product or putting that service offering together. A prototype can, of course, also be a really valuable way to attract investment. If that's how you're going to fund your business in the early stages and you need seed funding, then having something physical to be able to present is essential. But there is a misconception that a prototype needs a lot of investment and can take a lot of time. And while this might be true for some high tech ideas or mission critical products where you do need a basic proof that the tech is going to work, for many other products and services, a more rudimentary approach is absolutely fine. So if you haven't seen them already, I would really recommend taking a look at Google's rapid prototyping videos. You can have a quick, I think they're on YouTube, and they're brilliant. You get some of Google's brightest and best people explaining how to prototype using a Pritt stick and a bit of card and paper. I've also seen prototypes being made out of Lego. But if you do want to be a bit more sophisticated than that, but still save on money, you could approach, for example, your local design college, see if there's a student who can work with you on a prototype, possibly using something like 3D printing, which is all the rage now when it comes to those low-cost early prototypes. There are also plenty of online digital tools that can help you with prototyping as well. Mockups.com is one of them, but there are many others out there as well. I should actually probably point out at this stage as well that here at OxLEP, we do have our Innovation Support for Business programme. So if your idea is particularly around the tech or innovation space, then we may be able to help you with that programme with some of this initial prototyping and R&D, so your research and development stage. You might think also that prototyping only works for physical products, and perhaps you're sitting here now with an idea for a new service, but actually these prototyping principles do still apply for a service idea as well. You can use things like storyboards or even a video role play to be able to capture things like the customer journey and the user experience, which are all so important for being able to launch a successful service. The key thing to remember, though, is that prototyping shouldn't cost loads of money and it should be quick as well. Okay, so just to give you a real life example of how we prototyped at Wonky. So Laura, one of my co-founders, she made the relish in her kitchen. We bought the jars off Amazon, and my brother, my other business partner, he designed and printed the sticky labels just on a home printer. Now we knew this wasn't going to be the product that we'd eventually go to market with if we ever got that far, which we didn't know if we would do at that stage. But we wanted something tangible that our potential customers could see and feel, and in our case, obviously, taste as well. So we used these early prototype jars of relish to try out the products on friends and on family and colleagues as well. We joined a local startup accelerator here in Oxford, and we got other startup businesses to try our relishes. And we often used them in blind tastings against other real brands that were already on the shop shelf. But while the end user, the shopper, was one customer, and that was really valuable feedback to get, our other customers that we had to think about were the actual stores, the shops that we needed to sell our product to in the first place. And the first customer we approached was the Co-op. And we approached them really early on at the prototyping stage. And they were interested enough in the whole concept of what we were doing to invite us in for a chat. And it was really important that we had something to go into that meeting with. It gave them something to taste, obviously, and also something to visualize. And they knew as well that it wasn't the finished thing, but they were able to give us really useful feedback about the labels, about the branding, on the taste as well, and the range of products that we were planning. And that meeting was enough for them to say they'd be interested in stocking us once we'd gone away and built our new improved version. So the point that I'm making is that by having a prototype, that gave us access to that all important first meeting, which then gave us the confidence and the reassurance that we needed to start investing more seriously in the idea. So to invest in proper branding, looking for a manufacturer so that we could produce the relish to scale. But imagine if we'd spent all that money, if we'd spent the money on the branding, if we'd found a manufacturer, and then we went to the co-op and they said that they didn't like the name, or they didn't like the flavors, or the branding was just totally off. By doing it this way round, by having that prototype first, we were able to get that feedback to make sure that we were on the right track. Okay, so once you have your prototype, then you can do that next all-important stage of market research, which I referred to earlier, and that is the market testing phase. So I just mentioned how at Wonky we used our prototype to test out on potential customers. And with a prototype, you can get feedback on the look, the feel, the colour, the overall usability of your product. It's also where you can refine and further test some of those assumptions from your earlier round of market research, such as, crucially, your price point. So how much will your customer pay? And also your delivery model. So that's where and how people are going to be buying your product or service. Will it be online? Will it be through stores? But testing that, how you actually test it though, is really crucial, because testing on your friends and family is not enough. While important, you obviously can't guarantee their objectivity, and they may also not be representative of your target markets. So some of the ways in which you can test your products include independent focus groups. Now, focus groups are a age-old, tried and tested way of getting initial customer feedback. And there are plenty of agencies where you can spend a lot of money to convene your perfect target market sample. But there's no reason why you can't create your own focus group where the results are just as valid as using those official external focus groups. So for example, if you are designing a product or a service for preschoolers, so let's say a new type of drinking cup, sippy cup, you could ask permission to visit a local parent and toddler group and get them to try your product. But do make sure that you get both qualitative and quantitative data. So you want to be able to record people's comments and overall feedback, but you also need hard data. So for example, what percentage said they would definitely buy the product, which percentage said they would possibly buy the product, and what percentage said they would definitely not buy your product. You can also go to places where you have a lot of people. So we used to go to a lot of farmers markets and outside events in our early days, not really selling, but just wanting to get feedback from potential customers. And some of you may have heard the legendary story now of the Innocent Drinks founders, which I think has gone down in startup legend. There you go, Innocent Drinks, for those, I'm sure you've all heard of them. And I always think it's worth retelling this story. So in their early stage with their prototype smoothies and juices, two of the co-founders went to one of the big music festivals, Glastonbury, I think it was, and they paid for a pitch to sell their now famous smoothies. But on that day, they served up the smoothies in paper cups and they gave them out for free to passers-by. They had a rubbish bin for the paper cups at either end of their stall, their stand. And one of the bins had a big sign over it saying, if you think we should give up our day jobs to pursue the smoothie making full time, chuck your cup in here. The other said, if you think we should stick with the day job, chuck your cup in there. And yes, you guessed it, by the end of the day, the first bin was overflowing. And the founders never looked back, selling for a few £100 million a few years later to Coca-Cola. So the point there is that there are many imaginative ways that you can go out and do that all-important first research. So let me just get back to where I was. So something we did quite a lot of early on as well with Wonky, and which I would really recommend, is going to pitching competitions. So this is where you have to be brave and walk into a room full of strangers and pitch your idea. But it's a really, really useful way of getting feedback and further validation of your idea, as well as honing those all important pitching skills, which you may need if you're going to be seeking investment early on. So we did quite a lot of those pitching competitions, and at one of them we actually won, which was nice, and won a little bit of money, which was very nice, and actually enabled us to then pay for a professional branding company to do our next round of branding. Another way of validating your idea is to see if people will actually buy your service or product even before you've launched it, is to create a landing page. So just create a simple homepage, run some adverts, have a buy now button on your landing page, and see how many people actually click through. If you have people at that stage prior to launch who are already wanting to buy, then you've immediately validated your product, and that's a compelling reason to continue with your idea. So these are just a few examples. There are many other ways of testing your product or service and how strong that demand might be. Okay, so by this point, hopefully your confidence is starting to grow. You've validated your product, you know you're onto something. So it is worth taking a moment to make sure at this point that you have protected your idea and it remains your property. So intellectual property, or IP, can get quite complicated and does vary according to what kind of product or service you have. And I will put in an immediate disclaimer here and say I am not an IP lawyer, and so anyone wanting to find out more IP should either visit an IP lawyer or actually just go to the IPO website, the Intellectual Property Office, which does have some really, really useful handy guides. There's also a page on the OxLEP business website as well, I believe, which gives you some useful breakdown on the various bits of IP. Yeah, and
there's an IP session in the Startup Club in March as well.
Fantastic. There you go. I should have known that, shouldn't I? But so do come along, because it's a huge topic, and so we can only sort of touch upon it now. But broadly speaking, IP falls into four main categories. So you have patents, design, trademarks, and copyright. So patents protects new inventions. It protects how they work, what they do, how they do it, what they're made of, and how they are made, essentially. Designs protects the overall look of a product. So this includes colour, the shape, or the texture and material used. Trademarks, which may well apply to more people in the room today, that's what protects your brand, such as your business name or your logo, for example. And those trademarks can consist of just a word, or perhaps it's a phrase, or a picture, or it can be a combination of all of those. And then finally, copyright, that protects written, dramatic, musical and artistic works, including photos, recordings, software and databases. So at Wonky, as soon as we knew we were serious about taking our product to market, and actually in our case, it was before we even got to the prototyping stage, we trademarked the use of the word wonky with respect to misshapen fruit and veg. And we did the original registration by ourselves. It is fairly straightforward if you follow all of the guides. We did then subsequently have to use lawyers when it came to having to defend our trademark. And not everybody will have IP as well. Don't be rushing now to start registering things at the IPO. You won't necessarily have things that you can protect. And there is an argument, because it's a very long process and it can be quite arduous and expensive, that you may make the decision that it's actually not a good investment. I've met many tech firms, for example, over the years who haven't even bothered with the patent process. As something like the tech world moves so fast, they'd have to be taking new patents out constantly for every single iteration of their product. Of more value can be the speed of getting to market first with a product, rather than getting too bogged down in the IP. But do go along to that session in March if you want to find out a bit more about this topic. Okay, so I am going to work on the assumption that the majority of people in the room today, just by dint of the fact that it's a startup club, that you've either already started your business or you're thinking of starting a business. Now, that might be as a sole trader or a private limited company, or perhaps some of you are exploring the social enterprise route and looking at things like a community interest company, a KIC. All of these are very valid ways of setting up a business. But I'm also going to work on the assumption that many of you will be planning on managing most of the elements of the business yourself, perhaps even DIY route is exactly how most businesses start off. But I just wanted to pause here for a moment just to make the point that there are different models to get your product or service to market. Because I think it's important that we're honest, and setting up a business is a lot of work, especially with a product-based business. You've got your manufacturing, your packaging, your distribution to think about. If lots of people buy your products, which you hope they will, then you're going to grow, and soon you won't be able to do it all from your kitchen table. So a bit further down the line, you might need employees, you might need premises, you'll need a sales and a marketing plan. The list goes on. And I'm not trying to scare you with that, but that's just the reality. And for many of you, that will be one of the attractions of running your own business. It's not just about creating the product, but it's everything that goes along with it. But another route is to start outsourcing a lot of this work from an early stage. So you could outsource production to a contract manufacturer. You could outsource your sales and marketing to a local expert. And there are many great experts here in Oxfordshire. This is obviously a more expensive way to launch your business, as you need to cover those costs. But bringing in that expertise, that specialism early on can get you to market more quickly than trying to do it all yourself. It also means you can focus on the product and the ideas, if that's where your passion really lies. I'm sorry if you can hear my printer going in the background. My kids are printing off some of their work. Apologies. So the third option after DIY or outsourcing is to license your product or service. Now, you might decide you've done the research, you've done the prototyping, the design, you've filed your patents, you've got your copyright sorted, but you don't have either the time or the money or that all-important passion, desire to take the next step of launching to market. In which case, you could see whether you might at this stage be able to sell your idea outright or license your idea to another company which already has all of those resources in place, and in return you would get paid a royalty. The downside, of course, of that is that you lose control of how the business is run and what they do ultimately with your idea, and you're unlikely to get any of the potential glory for coming up with the idea. But for some, this is a lower effort and lower risk way of getting your product to market. Okay. Now, one of the factors that may help you decide whether you take your product to market yourself or you hire in other people to do it or license it is, of course, money. Now, I don't want to spend today looking at all of the different ways of financing your new venture. That's a whole different topic, although that is, of course, something that you should be thinking about from day one. But what I wanted to do briefly today was just to talk you through how you look at your numbers to help you price your product or service ahead of launch, as this can be another critical decision point, one of those moments where you need to take a step back and look at the viability of your venture. So if you're a product-based business, then this pricing formula up on the screen at the moment is just a very simple overview of how you decide what you sell your product for. So first of all, you need to look at your material costs. This is sometimes known as your cost of goods or your COG. And this is basically what it costs you to make that product so that it's ready to sell, to go to market. So in the case of our jars of wonky, it's the cost of the raw materials, so the fruit and veg that we use, but it's also the cost of the jar, it's the cost of the labels on the jar, and it's the cost of manufacturing the product. So we outgrew our kitchen table production line very early on, as the co-op were true to their word, and about a year after that first visit with our little early prototype jar, they agreed to start selling us. So that was great. But we had to outsource our manufacturing, and we now work with a farmer who has the equipment and space to manufacture our products for us. So after you've calculated your materials, you then have to factor in the labour. So that's either your wage or others that you might employ or outsource to. Now, it's a harsh truth that many people don't pay themselves at first while they're building the business, but you have to work on the strategy that you will want to pay yourself at some point. So your business model has to factor in the room from day one for you to be able to pay yourself in the future. You then need to factor in other expenses such as the packaging, postage, distribution, as well as your sales and marketing activities and other day-to-day overheads and expenses that you might have, such as rent or your utilities, your electricity and IT costs as well. And then finally, profit. People forget about this, but you should never forget about profit. This enables you need to build in a little extra as a profit margin so that you can reinvest in the business, put money aside, and it also gives you some wiggle room if you're using a wholesale model for your product. Now, a bit like early on after the initial market research phase, this is another one of those points in your journey where you may need to take a reality check. So for example, let's take the sippy cup, the toddler drinking cup, for example, from earlier. You may have taken on all of the feedback, you may have designed the most beautiful cup in the world, but if the costs involved in making it and shipping it means you have to sell that cup for £40 in order to cover all of your material and running costs before you even factor in a profit, then you know that it's not going to work. That idea is not viable because nobody is going to buy that cup for £40, even if it is the most beautifully engineered thing and their kids absolutely love it. In just the same way that at Wonky, if we discovered that the only way we could have covered our costs and made some money to pay ourselves was to sell the relish at £10 a jar, then we would have known then that the business model was simply not viable. Similarly, if you're offering a new service, I'm talking a lot about product here, but if you're offering a service, then you need to know what people are prepared to pay for that service. And this is something that you have hopefully established in your earlier market research around price point. And then you need to decide whether you can generate enough clients at that price point to be able to create the turnover and the income that you need to make it a viable idea. If the numbers don't add up, doesn't mean you have to give up there and then. It just means that you need to do some number crunching and really examine your business model in some further detail. So, for example, can you use a different ingredient, a cheaper ingredient? Perhaps you can use a different material. Or is there a more cost-efficient way to sell to the customer? It might be a case of going back to the drawing board for some elements of your product design. And that's another test of being an entrepreneur, being able to look for all those innovative and imaginative ways to be able to make your product viable and not giving up at the first hurdle. So terms like COG, profit margin, cash flow, forecast, these are all things that you will need to become familiar with and which also need to be part of your business plan, which hopefully you have in one form or another. And if you don't yet, then hopefully you'll soon be starting that. Okay, so while the numbers are crucial and you have to be thinking of those all the time, it has to be said that they're not as much fun as building the brand of your business. So that's step 8 in our preparations for getting launch ready. So if you want to have your product or service stand out, to get noticed and make an impact when you launch, then you do need a strong brand. Now, a lot of the work that you have done to this point will help shape your brand. So, for example, your value proposition, your target customer, the response to your prototyping and research. All of these steps will have helped inform the look, the feel, and the tone of your brand. Now, you can see on this slide, I've just thrown up a few examples of some of the very early brand concepts and designs that we tried at Wonky before settling on our final design, which I think is a huge improvement. But I just want to share an important lesson that I learned during my journey about branding. At least the design and image side of branding, because it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. It's so easy to spend a lot of time and a lot of money trying to come up with the perfect brand. So we actually spent, I still wince at well, I remember it, but we spent over a year from start to finish with our branding, and it never ever should have taken that long. There were all sorts of boring reasons why it did, but one of the main ones was overthinking the whole process rather than just getting on with it. So in food and drink, branding is more important than some other sectors, as you have to be able to stand out on the shop shelf, obviously. But depending on what you're selling and where you're selling it, you don't necessarily need to hire a shiny agency and spend the big bucks. I've seen some fantastic home design brands. There are also some really low cost alternatives, platforms such as Fiverr or 99 Designs, you may have come across before. They have freelance graphic designers who can create a logo for you in days on a really reasonable budget. Okay, it's also important to understand that branding is much more than just a logo or design. That's part of it, a crucial part of it, but arguably more important is your brand identity. So what do I mean by brand identity? Well, that's all about asking yourself questions such as, what do you stand for as a brand? You know, what are your values? What is your personality? And crucially, what is your story as well? So every new business, whether you know how to tell it yet or not, has a brand story. And being able to tell that story will really help you with a successful launch. It will help attract interest. So not just from customers, but from journalists and also from other key partners and stakeholders as well. So for us, it's been retailers like the Co-op who were happy to take a chance on an unknown brand because they liked the story that we had to tell about providing equal rights for all fruit and veg. The fact that we were playful rather than preachy with our branding, and also our close working relationships with farmers was another part of our overall brand identity. So once you've identified those elements of your brand identity, this will really help you to inform your marketing and your messaging when it comes to actually launching your new product or service on the world. Okay, so now we've got to the point where it's time to plan the launch itself. Careful planning is crucial, as you will be juggling a lot of elements at this point and you need to be really organised. I personally find it really helpful for one-off projects such as a launch, but also for day-to-day management, to use a visual planning tool. So you may have seen one of these, you might use one of these already, but if not, I'd advise checking out some of the free cloud-based planners that are out there, such as Asana or Trello, and we'll touch a bit more on the planning in a minute. But in terms of a high-level checklist, these are some of my top tips based on my experience, but also working with other businesses to how to achieve a successful launch. So number one, choosing a launch date. Now, that might sound blindingly obvious, but choosing the right time to launch is really important. So, for example, you don't want to be launching a new swimwear range in the middle of winter, or planning a local launch event in the middle of a school holiday when loads of people have gone away. These were in the days, of course, when we were allowed to go away on holiday. And it's also worth looking for a hook to hang your launch on. So if you're about to launch, let's say, a new mindfulness app, you could pick something like National Stress Awareness or Mental Health Day, for example. You're much more likely to generate interest from the media if they can find that all-important newsworthy angle for covering you and telling your story. It's also worth considering whether you actually want to do a full bells and whistles launch. For some businesses, and actually this may apply to service businesses in the room more than product businesses, a soft launch can be a good idea. So a soft launch is where you open the doors to your business, but very quietly. So you use it as an opportunity to test your delivery model, to get further feedback from your customers, and make those inevitable early mistakes without the world watching you. And you can then always do a hard launch later on when you have complete confidence in your delivery model and you've ironed out all of those early teething problems. Second on the checklist is to build a buzz. And I can't emphasize this enough. Many businesses make the mistake of waiting until the last minute when they have everything lined up and ready. They've got their website, they've got the Instagram, they've got the Facebook, they've got the newsletter ready to go, and then they press the button. But the problem is you're then operating from a standing start. Remember, I mentioned earlier that in the market testing and validation stage, the benefits of having something like a landing page where you can test the interest in your product. At the same time, weeks, possibly months before you launch, you could also start an Instagram page or a Facebook group and begin to build that all-important interest, that buzz around your product and brand. It's about creating that whole excitement of the coming soon, watch this space vibe, so that you're already building those customer leads in the form of followers or likes. So on your pre-launch landing page, make sure you have an option to sign up to a newsletter so people can be kept informed about the launch when it eventually comes. So next on the list is to check the detail. And by this, I mean making sure you have planned for everything. Because once you've launched, you're out there, you're in the marketplace, and you'll be judged not just on your product or service, but everything that goes with it. So the customer service, do you have an email that people can contact you with questions? Do you have a returns policy? All of these things are really, really important. Next, write a marketing plan. I'm just keeping one eye on time, so I'm going to run through these quickly. As I mentioned, in a few weeks, 3 weeks time, I think, I'm doing another webinar where we'll be unpacking how to develop an ongoing marketing strategy for your business. We'll be looking at in more detail at the various marketing channels to reach your customer, to raise your profile, and ultimately to boost your sales. But in terms of a launch marketing strategy, it's about making sure you have all of your bases covered and your timings planned. So if I just jump ahead to the next slide for a moment. So this is an extract from a launch marketing plan using one of those online tools that I mentioned, in this case Asana. It's what we use at Wonky, and it's particularly useful if you're working with a team because you can create your list of jobs, you can divide them into categories, set deadlines, and then delegate. So there are a number of channels you want to consider in terms of a launch marketing strategy. So social media, whether you love it or loathe it, you have to use it, especially if you have a business to consumer brand, a B2C brand. So check that you have all the channels appropriate to you without feeling like you have to use them all. Instagram might not be appropriate for your product or service. If you've got a B2B, a business to business product or service, for example, then you want to make sure you're on LinkedIn and you have a company page. But LinkedIn is going to be terribly useful if you're promoting your toddler sippy cup, for example. So just prioritize what suits your brand and product, so you don't disappear down that marketing social media rabbit hole. But where you are, the crucial thing is, so whatever channels you are across, make sure your branding and messaging is consistent across them all. So email, that's about developing that mailing list that we talked about. So if people have already registered an interest in your business idea, then make sure you don't forget about those people and you let them know about your launch. PR, don't ever underestimate the power of a very well-written press release. And depending on your target market, send it far and wide to local, national media, radio, TV stations. If you think about it, the media has a 24-hour cycle to fill, and journalists are lazy. I can say that because I used to be one. And they want people to come to them with the stories, especially now more than ever. The media wants to hear good news stories about entrepreneurs and startup businesses doing some really great work. Maybe you're a first-time entrepreneur because you've lost your job as part of the pandemic. That is part of your story, and that's what makes it worth telling to other people. Advertising, I won't go into that in too much depth now, but if you're selling mainly online, consider a digital marketing campaign. Facebook, Google Ads, still a really cheap and effective way of advertising and getting a good return on your investment. Launch events, clearly really hard to do at the moment. I'm talking about physical launch events. But unless yours is a hyper-local product or service, then why would you stage a physical event? Much better to do an Instagram or Facebook live page. And then finally on the marketing promotions and giveaways. Could you offer a discount on your launch week to all of your first customers? Okay, right. I'm going to skip the point about ambassadors. That's really what we were talking about when it's find people who can really talk about, shout about your brand. And then once you've thought about all of these things, you're ready for launch. But of course, you get to launch, and that's not actually the end. That's just the beginning of all the hard work. And I think the most important piece of advice at this stage is not to take your foot off the pedal. It's quite possible you spent months to get to this point, possibly even years. And the temptation is to give yourself a big pat on the back and say, we've done it, we've launched. And while you should enjoy that moment, the challenge really now is just beginning. But that is a topic for another webinar, and one we'll pick up on another time. I was just talking about moments of enjoying that point where you do get to launch. So I'll just share a little slide of me. That was launch day for Wonky, when we finally saw our jars on the supermarket shelves. So yeah, when you do get there, it's a great buzz. Right, I've probably gone on a bit too long there, so sorry if we'll have to squeeze in questions, but if people are able to stay for a couple of extra minutes. So do we have any questions there, Ant?
Wow, fantastic. Thank you, Ashley. And it is great to see that photo there. Just proves that you've been sharing your knowledge and experience from a real story, not from a book or anything else. So we had one question, but you answered it as you were going on. It was a great question around in those early stages where you talked about the insight you got from the market and the market research and the numbers, etc. And the question was, did you really use the numbers, or did it just help you make a decision? But then you went on to explain how the numbers helped you, so that was great. So open for questions. We appreciate people might have to dash off to other Zooms. Can't be anywhere near as good as this one, but yeah, Ashley's got a few minutes if people want to ask questions. And so while people are thinking, you did say that your brand element there took about a year for you to think on. You've told us that Wonky Foods has been a sort of 3-year journey so far. When was your launch date? How long did it take you from idea to launch?
If I actually tell the truth, that will probably be quite disheartening for a lot of people to hear. Or I don't know, maybe the other way around. So we originally had the idea for this, my brother and I, over a pub session that we called a beer storming rather than a brainstorming session. And it was literally one of those on the back of a fag packet ideas. But it took us a long time to get it from idea to have that confidence. I think we kept talking about it, but not actually doing it. And I'd say the turning point for us actually was joining that startup accelerator. So in a way, what people are doing by coming along and joining a startup club like this, because there's something about declaring your intentions, about starting to talk about your ideas and sharing those ideas with other people, that once it's out there, once you start talking about it, you're making it real in a way. So it was by joining that accelerator and then starting to go to a few pitch competitions that it validated the idea and made us realize how much we wanted to do it.
Yeah, I invented HelloFresh about 25 years ago, just never did out with it. So and you mentioned that you won a pitch competition and you got some money from that, which helped with your branding. Did you get any grants or anything else?
No, we didn't. And I regret that. I think there were probably opportunities that we could have pursued that we didn't. So we've bootstrapped the business from day one, and that is a lower risk route to go. I'm not sure actually that there were some of the grants that are around now, sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago when we needed them. So I would definitely advise people looking at that option. And we're just getting to the point now where we are looking for our first investment, and that's quite a scary prospect. And I'll need to go attend a few webinars to get some tips on how I do that. But yeah, people just have to make decisions on funding based on what they're comfortable with. You know, many people are very happy to go out and seek that seed funding, give away equity in their business, raise lots of cash from day one, even though they may not be making a profit for a few years down the line. And for some sectors like tech, then that's an accepted way of doing it. But people shouldn't feel like they have to go for funding. You know, if you a successful business idea should be generating money from day one. So if you've done your planning properly, if you've looked at your cost model and business model, then you shouldn't need too much funding to get up and running. And as I've hopefully emphasised, a lot of the things you can do on a budget, like the prototyping, literally Pritt stick, bit of paper. That's what the Google guys do.
Yeah. So. And what I love in how you've answered there, Ashley, is that, you know, even though you're here presenting and sharing your knowledge and you're one of our business advisors, you've just said you're going to go and soak up more knowledge to help you with your next stage.
Yeah. And I think it was, you know, Richard Branson who always, I was lucky enough to hear him speak quite a few times. And he always admitted, he was always humble enough to admit that he did not know everything, that he was still learning. And that actually he felt that his only real talent was spotting talent in other people. So he would always surround himself by those people who had that knowledge. Which I think is another valuable lesson as well. Don't feel like you have to know it all or should know it all. Yeah. But go out and seek that knowledge when it's out there.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here which is it's potentially not one that we'll have the absolute answer for, but how do you see the future for small companies in the context of COVID?
Well, do you know what? I think that's a good question. And I'm actually really positive. I think one of the silver linings to come out of this awful, awful period of time will be a discovery of some of the amazing small and independent businesses. And I'm seeing that already with some of the love that we've been shown as a small independent business. I'm also seeing the way small businesses are collaborating together in a way that they didn't before the pandemic. And actually, it is a truth that as a result of the pandemic, perhaps not for reasons that you would want to be starting a business, but because people have lost their jobs or have decided that actually they can't go back to the life, the career, the commute that they were doing before the pandemic, we're already seeing a massive surge in the number of startups, which I think is really exciting. And it's great to see. And you know, people are grabbing those opportunities to perhaps act upon those ideas, dreams that they've had for years, but not had the confidence to do anything with. So yes, I'm very positive about the future for small and independent businesses. Without being too naive, we're always still going to have our Amazons and our Tesco's, but there's a place, a really good place for small and independent businesses. And by the way, this month there's a fantastic campaign running locally called oh my gosh, it's an independent Oxford. If you look them up, they're challenging people to buy from independent small local businesses for a fortnight in February. So if you're passionate about small businesses, then go look up that campaign at Indie Oxford.
Fantastic. And I guess, I mean, the content you've just shared, when you delivered it back in November, we allowed you an hour and a half. So that partly explains why it took the hour. But what you've demonstrated there is 10 steps to help people think about it. So if people are going on their startup journey, webinars like this, accessing other support elsewhere, joining different networks, all of those things can be either free or very low cost. Yeah. And the more of those you cram in, the better chance you've got of your business idea succeeding.
Absolutely. And I really, really believe in the power of networks. You know, I have a group of close sort of female entrepreneurs that we meet up every couple of months and share ideas, share challenges, share problems, have a moan, wonder why we're doing it. But there is such strength in forming those networks at every stage of your business, but arguably in particular at the startup phase. I think it's very important.
Fantastic. And that leads us perfectly to just flagging Toby in the chat. Some of you will have seen. So he shared a link to a Telegram group. So Toby's very kindly been managing and hosting that group. Nothing to do with OxLEP, But this is not about OxLEP. This is about businesses and about startup, and that's what we try to do. So we're really pleased that there's a little group there. Join that group. Toby's giving examples there about the encouragement seen between businesses. So yeah, please do join that. Please also continue to join the other OxLEP Startup Club webinars. We've got a program up till the end of March at least. Who knows what will happen beyond then, but fingers crossed lockdown will be lifted at least, so we might all get off Zoom for a little while. And yeah, do keep an eye on the events page on the OxLEP business website, because that's where we post all of the webinars. They're always on there, so you can see other things as well. And I think therefore there's one question there from directly to you, Ashley, from Judith, of whether there's a women's network group that people can try to join, etc. But I think we've got contact details for Judith, so we can get in touch.
I would say to Judith, though, just have a quick look at IDEA Oxford, IDEA. It just launched last night, and it is a new network supporting female entrepreneurs in Oxfordshire. It's being spearheaded by Oxford University, but it's open to all. You don't have to have a connection to the university to be involved. And it was a really exciting launch last night. And it's all about levelling the playing field and getting more female entrepreneurs starting up their own businesses and succeeding with them as well. So yeah, that would be a great starting point, Judith.
Brilliant. We should probably all stop and go and get some late lunch.
Yes, well, thank you for listening, everybody. And I think in 3 weeks time, 3 weeks today, I'll be back with a marketing for beginners webinar, which will take some of the things that we've talked about today, but hopefully go into a bit more detail, especially at the end there. I had to skip through some of the marketing bits and pieces, so that would be a good chance to pick up on some of those in a bit more depth.
Fantastic, excellent. And yes, we will share the presentation, and the video will get posted on the OxLEP Business YouTube channel within the next week or so. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Great to see you all. Take care.